Hi everybody and welcome back to Mr. Stansfield's educational videos. This is part 2 on creating a multiple exposure in Photoshop. So we left off, we had just added the curves layer here to the layer 1 copy, and by Command Option clicking in between the two layers, we've linked this curves layer so it will only affect this image. I could have avoided this step by just adjusting the curves or levels, brightness and contrast on this image before I had started. That probably would have been the best choice. I'm going to hit the I key. That's going to give me the eyedropper tool over here. And basically what I want to do is Command click. Well, let's just do this. Let's maybe just increase the brightness a little bit by dragging up here, and then maybe just bring the shadows down a little bit. Basically, we just want our features to pop a little bit more. We want just a little bit more contrast in this image. And you can see the before and after on this curves layer. And that's another thing that we can do to just make the model's eyes stand out a little bit more, the highlight on the nose and lips, so that those features are a little bit more visible, and it gives us a little bit more to work with on this layer. All right, so let's move on to the next step. We can reduce the opacity as well. Oops. Make sure we've got layer 1 copy selected. We can reduce the opacity. We looked at how that works. And then the next step is to actually go to the landscape, click the landscape image, and then with the eyedropper we can click on this color right here, and you can see that down here the color is selected. Double click on it, and we can kind of play around with colors that are pretty close to that color of the image. You can choose any color that you'd like. Let's just click OK, and then we're going to select this layer 0, edit fill, or Shift F5, and then what we're going to use is use foreground color. Click OK. Now, that looks terrible. So what we're going to do is reduce the opacity of that color just a little bit. Nope, that's not going to work. So I think we just picked a color that is a little bit too dark. So what we can do is double click over here and then just click a lighter color. We want something kind of subtle. Click OK. And then edit fill or Shift F5. We'll use the shortcut key, use foreground color, click OK, and just lighten it up a little bit, and that'll be fine. All right, the next step is to take this layer here, layer 2, and copy it. We're going to click and drag it down here to copy it, move it to the top, and then delete that layer mask by clicking it and dragging it to the trash. We want to say delete, don't apply. We say delete. So here's the image. And what we're going to do is go up here, filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and then crank that up way, 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 way up. And depending on the size of your image, you may find that somewhere around 50 pixels looks good. In this case, we're going to go all the way up to the very top, 250. Click OK. And we're going to let that finish. And this is just to add a little bit more of a dynamic background than the color that we pasted into layer 0. We're going to add a layer mask now. Click on the layer mask guy right there. We're going to grab the brush tool. We can hit the B key to grab the brush tool. And remember, we can use the right bracket, left bracket on the keyboard, shift left bracket, shift right bracket to make it harder or softer. And this time we want to make sure that we've got our opacity and flow set to 100. Hit D for default. That'll give us white and black, and then X to switch between the two. I'm going to make this just a little bit bigger. And then we want to actually start painting. My mouse just went crazy there. In the image again. And what we want to do is kind of allow for this vignette to happen. And I'm just clicking. If I go too far over, I can hit the X key and then paint it back in. And you can really do a whole lot of different things here. You can make your vignette bigger, brighter. Or you can make it more subtle. I'm going to hit the X key and then fill with white and then paint it again. There's some shortcut keys there, but you know that the shortcut key for painting, filling is Shift F5. So in this case, I think just a subtle little bit of a vignette happening there. And you can see that things get really dark up in this corner. So we could add, kind of like what we did with this layer one copy, we can add a new curves adjustment layer and then lock it to the layer 2 copy and then take this part of the image and just brighten it up. Drag that part right there. Just drag the whole thing up. All right. Finally, what we can do is add a curves layer to the very top. We're not going to lock it to the layer below, and we can adjust the overall contrast, brightness of the image. You can see that this affects the color. So if we only wanted to adjust the brightness and the contrast, we would change this to luminosity, and it would just change the values there. And you know, this is going to be totally subjective. It's totally up to you. You want a little bit darker? You want a little bit lighter? Don't go crazy. But you know, generally we keep the S curve or a bell curve above. Generally, we're not making our images darker, although you may want to. And that is a very long-winded way of getting into making a multiple exposure image. This was adapted from Chris Spooner's multiple exposure video on YouTube. Just search for Chris Spooner and you can watch a 5-minute version of this 20-minute version. This really lays everything out, and his goes through all of this a lot faster. I've added a couple of steps. The final step, of course, is always File, Save As. And when we're working with so many layers, we want to make sure that we save this image as a Photoshop file, which should be the default, rather than a JPEG. So normally we save JPEGs. This one we're going to save as a Photoshop file. And that's it.